Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our coverage of the International Remote Viewing Association Conference here in Menlo Park, California. With us right now is guest Jeffrey Mishlove, the only PhD holder in parapsychology, which is fantastic and amazing, but also worked with the Bigelow Institute and won the first place award for research in life after death. What was it that first got you into the world of remote viewing? Because it's not really a field that most PhDs, let's just say, would go into. Now, granted, you're a PhD in parapsychology. But what is it that led you down the path of parapsychological studies to begin with?
Oh, okay. That's a few questions at once. Nice to be here with you, Christopher. I was originally a graduate student in criminology. If you had known me in 1972, you would have seen an unhappy person who was volunteering at San Quentin Prison here in the Bay Area, because I was a student at Berkeley, and working in the psychiatric unit, conducting group therapy with murderers and rapists.
Wow.
And it was at that point in my life when I had a dream, the most powerful dream of my life. And we're talking 50 years ago. I remember it vividly, in which my great uncle, Harry, came to me in a dream. And we merged our souls, maybe is the best way to put it into English words. It was so incredible that when I awoke from the dream, I was crying tears of joy and simultaneously singing a very sacred song from the Jewish religion. Oh. And as I wrote home, I said, "How's Uncle Harry?" My mother called me right away when she got the letter, and she said, "How did you know he just died?"
Wow.
And I began thinking that I love the study of human deviance, but I wanted to shift from negative forms of deviance to positive. And so I agonized over that for a long time, months and months, because if you go to a college like Berkeley, any other major university, if you want to study crime, psychopathology, social problems, you can do that. But if you want to study creativity, intuition, psychic functioning, mysticism, it's pretty hard. And at Berkeley, I found in those days it was impossible.
Wow.
So I had another dream eventually after, 5-6 months. I dreamt I was visiting some friends of mine in Berkeley. But I should point out, even before I had that dream, after months of agonizing, I knew that day when I woke up that I was going to have a dream that night, and the answer to my quest would come in a dream. I knew it, but I had no idea what the dream was. Even after I had the dream, I still didn't know. I dreamt I was visiting friends of mine in Berkeley. They were in married student housing. I knocked on the door of their little apartment. No answer. I happened to, in the dream, find a key, let myself into the apartment, walked into the living room. There on the floor, in the middle of the floor, was a magazine. I picked it up. It was called EYE.
Oh, okay.
So I'm paging through this magazine when I woke up from the dream with this feeling of exhilaration, like, wow, now I have the answer. But as I pointed out, I didn't know what.
Yeah.
No idea. So I acted out the dream, put on my tennis shoes, ran all the way across Berkeley, got to the apartment, knocked on the door, no answer. And I happened to know where they kept the key. So I let myself in, walked into the living room, and there on the middle of the living room floor was a magazine, as I had dreamt. It was not EYE, it was called Focus. And that magazine literally brought focus to my life.
Interesting.
And it was the magazine of KQED, listener-sponsored public radio and television in the Bay Area. And reading through it, paging through it, I had the idea for the first time in my life, I could pursue my interests by getting involved in non-commercial areas of the media, which for me at that time, if you had known me, I didn't own a radio or a TV. I didn't believe in radios or televisions. I thought the only authentic human communication was face-to-face. Radio and TV were all phony baloney. But at that moment, I changed my mind. I went over to the local nonprofit Pacifica radio station in Berkeley, KPFA, and said, I'd like to volunteer.
Wow.
And they said, okay, sit at this desk, and when you hear the buzzer, push this button and let people in the front door. And even though I had my master's degree at that point, I was glad to do it. And within 3 weeks, I had learned how to produce a radio program, and the program director at the station liked it and said, well, we have a regular slot for you every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. Would you please host this interview program called The Mind's Ear? And I found myself like 3 weeks after my dream, sitting at a table like this with world-class experts in all the areas I wanted to study, coming on their book tours through San Francisco, and I was interviewing them, which gave me the confidence to then go back to the university and, taking advantage of some obscure rules, create my own unique, individual, interdisciplinary doctoral major.
Wow.
In parapsychology.
Wow. So you actively created your own course of study.
Yes, I did, but I can tell you I was guided by dreams.
Wow. And now, to bring remote viewing into this, because how important is paying attention to dreams, being present in moments like that, and recognizing moments like that? When it comes to training oneself for remote viewing, because there's the concept of precognitive remote viewing, and cognitive remote viewing. So let's get into those a little bit, and how this dream of yours led you down the path into remote viewing eventually.
Well, let me be clear. I did get into remote viewing, but I don't consider myself a remote viewer.
Sure.
When I talk to people about these experiences that I had, the way I explain it to myself and to others is that when you resolve to become the best version of yourself, the universe will reach out to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a topic that we talk about regularly on the show. I guess nowadays it's really talked about in the form of manifestation.
Yes.
Kind of finding that sine wave in your life of what you're magnetically drawn to and what you're technically, I guess, supposed to be doing. It's interesting because for years I heard from family members like, hey, when are you going to stop playing with all those wires on Friday night and actually go out and get a real job? Referring to me running sound for rock and roll bands and being an audio engineer. Now I traveled the country as an audio engineer and as a video engineer. Their view of that is 180 degrees now. And they're like, wow, wait a minute, there is an actual career path there. And not many people realize that. So the fact that you literally stumbled into, and I guess really more followed the path that was laid out in front of you, and being open to the fact that what you saw might be something different.
Yeah, and I don't think everybody is destined to become a remote viewer, but it's useful for everybody to know that they can. Yeah,
and let's get into that for a minute, because when we talked with Deborah Lynn Katz a few weeks ago, that was a topic that we brought up was with the ideas, especially nowadays in modern physics, things like that, of literally vibration, like Hal Puthoff was talking about today on stage, we're only looking and hearing a minute fraction of the actual spectrum that is out there.
Right.
So when you take that into account, and when you take into account the fact that, we are all mainly empty mass and nothing but vibration, it's easy to imagine the fact that, yes, by all laws of physics, energy is not created or destroyed, it is changed. So even to think about that in terms of life beyond, consciousness beyond this physical realm, and the idea of being cognitive of something at a distance, it doesn't sound too much like science fiction at that point. It doesn't sound too much like mythology. It kind of sounds like quantum physics.
That would be one way to look at it, although my friend Russell Tarr thinks magic. It's magic.
Well, and Dean Radin, of course, refers to it as, in his book, Real Magic, very much the same way. And once again, that is the source of things like abracadabra. It's the source of mythic, esoteric traditions the world over. And it's interesting to see that there is that common thread amongst mystic traditions across the world. So how did your research with the Bigelow Institute into consciousness beyond death come about?
Well, let me be clear. I entered an essay competition. It's not so much that I'm a researcher into life after death. There are people who do. They work in laboratories or in academic programs where they do field investigations of mediums and or study not remote viewers, near-death experience. My role has been talking to people, just like you do. That's been my major path. I have written books and so on, but the Bigelow Institute sponsored an essay competition, and I thought I could win, and so I I wrote an essay on it, and it won first prize. And now I'm serving on the board of directors of the Bigelow Institute. But it's not as if I did research to write the essay. The essay was, in fact, largely based on interviews I've done. Okay. And personal experiences, such as the one with my Uncle Harry that I just told you about.
Sure. And even with that in mind, how have experiences like that and interviewing people over the years changed the way that you look at remote viewing, change the way that you look at things like parapsychology and even life after death?
I tend to think, and I bet you would agree with me, that interviewing is the best profession in the world.
Oh, it's great. I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I was really a coffee drinker, but yeah, it really does give you a different insight, and let you peel some stuff away, especially whenever you get a chance to get books ahead of time, things like that. I try to make it a good habit whenever I have people on to typically read 60 to 100 pages of their book. It at least gives me a springboard for the conversation, a good brushstroke of what they're working on and what it's about. We've gotten past the thesis statement at that point. And gotten into some meat, but yet still it allows them to take me somewhere and for me to discover something within the conversation.
Right. And it's about being in the here and now. You have to be present, totally present.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the very basics of remote viewing is to be present to the moment, whatever it offers. Now in remote viewing, you create a context, you have a protocol. So the protocol tells you what you're going to do, but you have to be present for it.
Yeah. Even today with the experiments going on and stuff like that, we'll find out results here in a little while, actually. But in your years of interviewing people, things like that, how have you seen the remote viewing community change, and how have you seen the view of remote viewing changed within the general community in the world?
Well, I got started in remote viewing specifically in 1976. I was still a graduate student.
Oh, wow.
At the time. Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff gave a talk at the Institute for the Study of Consciousness, where I was living at the time.
Wow.
It was a little institute in Berkeley set up by a wonderful gentleman from Philadelphia named Arthur M. Young, who is also the inventor of the Bell helicopter.
Oh, wow.
And so he was a cosmologist as well. He had many wonderful theories. And he came to Berkeley, and some friends of mine organized a seminar with him. And I was, eagerly lapping up everything he had to say. And so when he set up his institute in Berkeley, he invited me to move in.
Oh, wow.
And live there.
What an incredible opportunity.
It was an opportunity. And of course, people like Puthoff and Targ, when they're passing, talking about their early work in remote viewing, is one of the first places they would come. So, and then they invited me to come over to SRI, where they were doing the research, to experience it firsthand.
And what was that like for you? To actually be in the bowels of the beast, literally, like where it was happening.
Well, you go into it's a special room. It was in the radio science laboratory at SRI, and it was a room that had been designed so that no radio signals could penetrate.
Oh, wow.
It had thick walls, like 6-inch thick, and you're in this room. And so all of a sudden, there aren't any electromagnetic signals. Like right now, where we are.
Swathed.
Right. All the radio and TV and internet signals and Wi-Fi, they're all passing through the body. Yep. They're passing through the neurons in your brain. But in that room, everything is quiet. And of course, SRI, if you've ever been there, it's a very upscale facility. Some of the world's most brilliant scientists are working there. And Russell Targ, who was the person who served as what they called the monitor in remote viewing, sits with me while I'm doing the remote viewing. He just said to me, everybody who comes to our laboratory is successful at remote viewing. And he explains that in such a way that you get it. It's like he lays it down and it sticks.
Well, and I remember my first I had heard about Ingo Swann, I'd heard about remote viewing, but my first real in-depth exposure to it was hearing people like Russell and Hal come on to Coast back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the programs really first started being fully declassified, where they could come out and publicly talk about the work that was done.
Well, their first book came out in the 1970s. They were publishing in scientific public magazines in the mid-70s. It was already public knowledge then. What wasn't known it was really an open secret that they were getting funding from the CIA.
Exactly. The whole Stargate program, things like that. And I think that's really where I think that's where a lot of the public knowledge came from, and a lot of the efficacy in the eyes of the public. Mainly because, like, hey, why would the government spend billions of dollars on this if hundreds of millions?
No.
Researching.
It was about $1 million a year for 20 years.
Okay.
So they kept getting funding, and it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always from the government, but they did survive for about 20 years doing this program.
And like you said, to the pride of everybody that comes in here is successful.
Yeah.
And I remember somewhere at home, I literally have the SRI VHS that they used to send out that you used to be able to call in and get a copy, amazing information. And I remember being flabbergasted by it. And to know now that it's out there, financial institutions are using remote viewing. There are scientists using remote viewing. It's pretty interesting.
It's spread. It's become a social movement, and it's growing every year. And there's enormous resistance still in academia. That's why 40 years since I got a doctoral diploma that says parapsychology, no one has done it since. And so there's still a lot of resistance at that level. But at the level of the public, the public is embracing this. People have psychic or paranormal experiences, in the order of 70%. Of the population or so. What most people don't appreciate is the enormous power of the human mind.
Yeah. And literally the enormous power of human minds when put together on a task like that. When numerous people are given the same target to view, that kind of stuff. Not only to confirm things, but you get a much larger swath of data and information.
Actually, that's a problem. If you have multiple people looking at the same target at the same time, you are liable to fall into a problem analyzing the data. It's known as the stacking effect in statistics. And it's the idea that what if there was some event that took place in the news that day that somehow triggered each of those people to have similar imagery that resulted in the target. You cannot treat their each individual experience as independent of all the others.
Sure.
So if you're testing a mass of people and you're trying to prove the reality of psychic functioning, you would want to give them all different targets.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And even to that note, hearing Hal talk this morning about the experiments that were being done and the task that it was to actively find proper objects where they were different enough in texture, form, shape, materials, things like that, so that somebody said, I see a smooth object. Well, that could be this table. It could be this shirt. It could be this. It could be 100 different things that are smooth. Yeah. It was really interesting to hear he and his wife over breakfast talking about that. And now, I guess part of me is, caught with the fact that there have been numerous instances. I remember the egg experiments that were going on with MIT years ago that rang off just before 9/11. How much of this comes down to the concept of a mass consciousness? How much of this comes down to the concept of a shared consciousness between people?
Now, would your viewers know what the egg experiment is all about? Should I explain it?
Please feel free to explain. I know that we've touched on it before on the show, things like that, but...
Well, the eggs are actually random event generators, or regs.
Random number generators, basically.
So they're scattered around the world, and they're all sending random numbers, usually binary digits, zeros and ones, all going into a central computer. And because these are quantum mechanical random event generators, they're supposedly as random as anything can be. But if there are certain spikes in the data, where all of a sudden the data is deviating in a particular direction, that would be considered an unusual event and maybe caused by, you could say, the let me put it differently, the quantum foam that underlies reality is being perturbed in some way by the consciousness of masses of people. So yes, 9/11 was a major example where they found a perturbation. You could call it a perturbation in the quantum foam.
Yeah, it was quite literally the wow signal of that experiment.
There was another one during the funeral of Princess Diana, things like that. So there's been a lot of measurements made of that sort that does suggest, in fact, if you want my view of group consciousness.
Please.
Because I know I cut you short a little bit.
No, that's how
when I talked about, many people looking at the same target.
Yeah.
There are ways that you can do it that are perfectly valid. And one of those is the consensus methodology. It's used very effectively with remote viewers working on archaeological projects where they are. You don't treat each viewer statistically as an independent trial, but you can combine the best information from all the viewers, and it's one trial. It's a single trial, but it's often a direct hit. You get a very high hit rate that way.
Interesting.
And Stefan Schwartz, one of our colleagues, one of the founders of the International Remote Viewing Association, has used that method very successfully in archaeological research in Egypt and in the Mediterranean, doing underwater archaeology.
Now, with that in mind, I want to ask a couple of hard questions. Couple of hard personal belief questions when it comes to this. How do you feel about being able to remote view through time? And how do you feel about being able to remote view places like Mars? Hell, as my God, his name just left my head.
Ingo Swann.
Not Ingo Swann. He just came out and said that he remote viewed the Ark of the Covenant a few months ago. It will come to me in a moment. Okay. But things like that, where like the being able to remote view the Ark of the Covenant, being able to. There was somebody else that I saw who did a remote viewing session on a bunch of people that were supposedly murdered by Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Things like that. Where do you fall on those type of topics when it comes to remote viewing?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and it's kind of ticklish. Because, the most scientific forms of remote viewing are the ones in which there is a physical target, so you can compare the reports of the remote viewers with an actual target that's easily accessible.
Yeah.
Like it could be, something in a sealed envelope, or it could be a place you go to. But when you're talking about the Ark of the Covenant or...
Uri Geller. It was Uri Geller who said that he remote viewed the location of the Ark of the Covenant.
All right. Well, nobody can check it. Unless he says, go to this particular place on the map and dig 10 feet down, and which is pretty much what they did in Stefan Schwartz's archaeological research. And if they come up with the Ark of the Covenant, good.
Cool. Yeah.
But when it comes to things that aren't easily verifiable, I'm very interested in it. I'd like to see remote viewers look into the afterlife.
I am myself, I say it on the show all the time, I am more apt to believe an experiencer until proved otherwise. Mm-hmm. You tell me you have remote viewed Mars 600 years ago, I'm inclined to believe you until proven otherwise.
Well, at least
just
keep
who
an
I am.
open mind.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
In Uri Geller's case, now I know every time you mention Uri Geller's name,
it can be tough.
I hear from people who say, "What about the Johnny Carson show back in 1975?
Yeah,
he didn't perform on camera as he was expected to. Therefore, he's a total fraud."
Yeah.
Well, that's total nonsense.
Yeah.
Remote viewing, as any experienced remote viewer will tell you, the great remote viewers are like the great baseball players, like Babe Ruth, hit more home runs in his era than any other player. No. But he struck out more often than he hit home runs.
That's right.
And so you have to approach the phenomena until the human species is more evolved. It's something we're going to look at statistically.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's where I come down to it on the science of it, is the statistics. And the numbers show that it works.
Yeah.
It's there. It's been proven time and time again. I thought that it was a great showing of it in Caroline Corey's movie Superhuman. I thought that they did a great job covering that and covering the idea behind it, and the idea that we are all connected. We just have to learn to use that connection and have to learn to tap into it and find that free. It's like tuning a radio.
Well, the sad thing to me is that large segments of our culture don't see it as that we're all connected. They seem to think that it's a zero-sum game, and if I win and you lose, that's the best outcome.
Well, and I guess the problem is seeing a winner and a loser to begin with. Those, I believe, are the people who enjoy having arguments and not debates.
Yeah.
Because and that's, I think, a big part of it, even when it comes to the science of things, is being willing to have the conversation, and being willing to have the conversation without the need to convince somebody of your paradigm, and being open-minded and open-hearted enough to listen to somebody's point and accept it for what it is.
Or simply being curious.
Yeah, being curious enough to care.
Being curious and not judgmental.
That's right. That's right.
But a big part of the population is just the opposite.
Well, and that's just it. That's a big thing that we've talked about over the last couple months, is that negative side of paranormal experiences, that negative side of UFO experiences, psychic experiences, experiences with the beyond, even those that have had near-death experiences who come back and didn't have that white light at the end. They didn't come back with a message or a purpose. Yeah. I thought when that happened, I was supposed to come back with a message or a purpose, and my life was supposed to be changed. What about those people? What about the people that do have the remote viewing experiences but can't tell anybody around them because they aren't open of mind?
Well, the good news is that things are slowly changing.
Yes.
And that society is becoming more and more open. When I first started doing remote viewing in 1976, hardly anybody had ever heard of it. And it was a taboo topic. Now, I think it's fair to say there are tens of thousands of people who are approaching it like very serious hobbyists, at the level of, let's say, amateur astronomers.
Sure.
They're dedicated to perfecting their craft. And that number is growing slowly but steadily every year. And sure, there are people who would say, this is the work of the devil and things like that. But the truth of the matter is that that's judgmental. And people, more and more people are becoming curious instead of being judgmental.
Yeah. Yeah. There really has been, as Art Bell would say back in the day, a quickening. With that, there has been almost like a snowball rolling downhill of people who are willing to explore, people who are willing to question.
Yeah.
And it's great because we need more people who are willing to sail around the world while the rest of the world thinks it's flat. We need more 15, 20 percenters where everybody else is going, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's the thing to do. But it's that small slice of people who are willing to step out on the ledge that end up finding these amazing discoveries that end up.
And the amazing discovery is we don't know the outer limits of human capability. You were mentioning time and space earlier. They seem to be no obstacle whatsoever.
Well, and especially whenever you consider it's one of the things that theologically I've always said to any fundamentalist is, don't forget, we decided what a minute is.
Yeah.
We did that. So that means technically any calculation that we are putting out there, we're like, we utterly made that up. We're hoping that it hits home and hits the spot, but that's why in science it takes years and decades. I mean, good Lord, even whenever you look at the theory of evolution, still theory. It's not called the law of evolution yet. Still a working theory, even after all this time. So we have to remember that science is forever evolving. By nature, it's supposed to ever evolve.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's hard when you have quite a bit of scientific community that really does have almost that religious complex of, well, yeah, but this is what science says is. It's like, okay.
Well, you know, people in the academic and scientific communities are afraid. They're afraid that their colleagues will laugh at them.
Yeah.
And that's a very strong fear. And so they would rather err on the side of caution, which means, don't let these crackpots into your laboratory, into your educational institution. And as a result, you could say they're cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, because once again, you're falling short of that mandate of science, which is to go forth, to explore, to see how far it goes.
There's a price that we pay for that obstinance. And I can tell you, everybody in the parapsychology community has their war stories. I've been reading about it today over and over again, about very carefully conducted research submitted for publication in mainstream journals where the editors simply say, I think you've written a great paper, I'm not going to publish it.
Wow.
It's so that happens a lot. And as I say, 40 years after getting a doctoral diploma in parapsychology, where are the others? Although, to be fair, there are hundreds of people who do doctoral research on parapsychological topics.
Yes. And I would love to have you on to talk about that, to talk about so many other things. Let everybody know where they can go to find out more about your show, New Thinking Aloud, where they can go to buy your books, where they can go to keep up with everything, Dr. Mishlove.
Well, it's very simple. New Thinking Aloud, ALLOWED, all one word, .com.
Love it. Anybody that has their own domain, it's proper. Thank you so much for taking the time out on what has been a very busy first day of IRVA 2022. So please hold on real quick while we close out. While you're online checking out all the amazing work of Jeffrey Mishlove, make sure to stop on by CuriousRealm.com. That is where you can find all the episodes. That's where you can find all of the content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Like us on YouTube, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll be right back after this commercial with more interviews. We'll see you in just a minute, folks.